Hello everyone, welcome to Cutie Pie Collective. I'm really excited to show you what I've been working on. Today's video is going to be another historical scroll. This month's theme was Botanical. For those of you who might not know exactly what that is, when talking about scrolls, that's anything you might find in a garden, or that's how I like to think of it. So plants, flowers, berries, little critters like caterpillars, frogs, and things like that. I'm working off of multiple different reference pictures for different elements. I'm just picking and choosing what I like the look of and mashing them together to make a scroll that I think looks nice. So my pear and caterpillar come from one scroll, my flowers and wasp come from another, and then the blackberries come from a different scroll as well. I have gotten my scroll all set up with a 1-inch border to help with framing later, and now I'm lightly sketching everything in pencil. I really like making botanical scrolls. I've always liked sketching natural things, so making scrolls full of flowers and insects and fruits is a really fun time for me. I also find that natural things like this are easier to paint, because you can find more references for how they might look. Even though when you're looking for medieval references of botanicals, it can be kind of difficult to find things you might want to replicate. I was only able to find one collection of botanical images that I really liked, or that really looked realistic. A lot of the other botanical images from this time period are not very realistic, or not very detailed, so it's kind of hard to replicate them. After I had my basic sketch down, I went back through and I tried to add more detail. And for this scroll, I tried to follow things pretty closely to the originals. You sort of have to embrace that when you're doing botanical things or when you're doing natural things. What you make is not going to look exactly like the reference. And that's okay, because in nature things would have looked different. So not every caterpillar and pear is going to look the exact same. Every flower is going to bloom in a different way, and I think that's what makes botanical scrolls really interesting, because you can use the same reference and make multiple scrolls, and each of them will be beautiful in their own way. The process I'm using for this scroll is I'm doing a pencil sketch and then I'm painting over it. So you have to be a little bit careful with your paint layer, because the paint will lock in the sketch. You can't really erase the pencil beneath the paint, so you have to go through and try to erase any pencil that you're not sure you're going to be covering with ink later, or you just have to be okay with the pencil showing through a little bit. Sometimes I actually think that the pencil helps give a kind of depth to the paint. It shows a more human side to it, like you can see someone sketched it out, and then they're painting over it. So it's just something you have to be aware of. Now you can see that when I was making this pear, I left a little light spot to give a highlight, and then I went over it later with paint to tint that light spot to be the same general color as the pear. That way it looks more like the light spot is reflecting off the pear, instead of just having like a blank spot there. I think it looks better that way. You can also rinse out your brush and go over that area if the light spot got too dark, and remove some of the pigment. It can help lighten it back up again. That's what I ended up doing. I also like to work in layers of paint, so I start with a really light wash of one color, and then I come back through with a different tint and layer my paint over and over again until I get the right color that I want for things. You also really can't see it very well on camera, but even when you paint over things, you can usually see the sketch marks. So like with this caterpillar, I could still sort of see where I had sketched out the individual sections for different colors on them, even after I put down the black. Even if it was a little bit tricky, I could still see it. I also like to work where I put down one layer and then I'll go do something else and put down its first layer, and then I go back to what I was working on before. Because when you're putting down layers, if you don't let the previous layer dry enough, things will bleed and not stay where you want them to, or it'll pool in different directions and the colors will just move on you, and it's not very fun. So I jumped around a lot from one object to the next, so I can get the right look. I ended up adding these yellow spots just to sort of be a placeholder. I ended up going over them later with a glittery ink, so it wasn't that important. But it was more of a visual placeholder for me, so I could remember what I wanted to do, and I wasn't really sure if I wanted to add the shimmer at this point or not. But after seeing it as just plain yellow, I was like, you know what? I think a little bit of shimmery might be nice. So I went back and completely covered it with shimmering ink. It was also really hard for me to get the bottom of this pear to look right, in my opinion at least. I wanted to get the right sort of gradient of color, but it just refused to work with me and tried to bleed multiple times, so it was a bit of a problem causer, but ended up looking pretty good in the end. My sisters and mom love this pear so much. They cannot stop telling me how good they think it looks. I don't know, I think it looks pretty good, but they've told me that they think it's the best thing I've made. I think I would have normally just left it without that last layer of yellow-brown, but the reference had these little tiny spots of brown on it, and I decided to go ahead and try to add that. But then I had too much paint in my brush and the spots ended up getting way bigger than I thought they would. So, I mean, things happen, and sometimes you just have to roll with it, and sometimes it can be a good thing. I've also found that when I'm doing a color like this pink, it can be really difficult if I'm just using a red that I've diluted down to the point that when I paint it on, it becomes light pink. It can be really hard to maintain that color across the whole flower, so it's easier to just take white and mix in little bits of red. That way you can get a very consistent pink color, and then use that instead of trying to dilute the red down to the same consistency as before. For all of its shadows, I just kept adding a little bit more red to the pink, so everything stayed decently consistent. I'm happy because a lot of these botanical scrolls end up being a lot about how you do your shading. I don't personally think my shading technique is very special, but shading can be really difficult, and I even struggle myself with shading sometimes. So botanicals can be really good practice. How I like to do my shading is after I get my 2 layers, like my light highlight layer I put down, and then I've gone back over and I've added all my shadows, I rinse out my brush and dry it so it's just damp by running it through my fingers. And then I'll rub and dab it lightly on the edge of the 2 colors I want to blend together. It'll usually blend pretty well that way. You guys should try it and see what you think of that technique, and let me know if it works for you. I ended up trying to put the black on these blackberries a little too soon, so it ended up bleeding out a lot. It didn't end up being such a bad thing in the end, but at the time I was kind of internally panicking because I thought I had ruined my blackberries. So future Donna is happy to tell you that they did not look horrendous at the end, but Donna at the time of recording this video was very worried. I like to start all of my greenery with a light layer of yellow. I think it just helps brighten up any green that I put on top of it, and gives a little better overall color. I do the same with pretty much anything that might be yellow or green. That way, if there's highlights, they're sort of already taken care of. You don't really have to worry about trying to lighten anything up afterwards. It already has a nice highlight to it. As I started repainting these stems, I tried to paint from the bottom of the stem to leave a little bit of a highlight around the top. Most of the time, that didn't end up working out perfectly, but sometimes it worked alright. Just to try to give a little bit more of a shadowed 3D look. I paint in a lot of layers. I think it's because I'm afraid of putting down color and having it in some way mess up what I've already made. So I like to do lots of light layers and build up my colors gradually, instead of using a very dark or bold color straight from the start. I think it ends up giving it a nice look though. It sort of adds depth to it. These leaves killed me a little bit on the inside. I don't know why, they did not want to work with me. I ended up having to leave them and come back to them. I added my first layer of white highlights before what I would normally do. It wasn't as thick of a white, and you can sort of see that after it dried, it kind of disappeared a little bit. Now I'm going through and I'm adding my ink, and I'm using a sparkly copper for this part on the yellow rose. I thought the copper would complement the yellow more than the gold would, and make it pop a little bit more. And it ended up looking really nice. It also made the middle of the flowers look really good. I completely freehanded it because I had no idea what I wanted to do for that part. I just dotted around and then drew lines in, and I ended up being really happy with it. I also used both of the metallic inks on the wasp's wings, copper for the back and gold for the front, because the original had sort of a two-toned look. I had no idea how I was going to do the thorns on these roses, because the original had thorns, but I didn't want to paint them, so it made things a little difficult. It wasn't until I was in the inking stage that I finally realized, oh hey, I could just ink the thorns, and then these roses would have pretty shimmery thorns, and it turned out looking really nice, at least in my opinion. I think it really tied the roses together. So I'm happy with how that turned out, but it was definitely an on-the-fly sort of decision. I just really love sparkly things, so whenever I can add sparkle, I will add sparkle. So my caterpillar originally had some different texture to him. He had the large yellow spots that I inked in with shiny ink, and then he had little yellow spots, but I traded out those spots with both gold and copper, and it looked nice. It was also shiny, which was a bonus. Also, because I was so invested with the thorns of my roses, I actually forgot that the blackberry stem had thorns as well. And by the time I was finished with it, I liked it enough that I didn't want to go back and change it. So that is different from the original, but that's okay. Things got a little out of hand on the bottom of this rose, so I just sort of brushed it down and tried to take some of it off. Alright, I hated this moment. I was so upset. I really did not think I had that much ink in my nib. I thought it was going to be okay. It was not. I ended up sort of repositioning and redistributing a lot of it to try to thin out the spot, and then sort of scraped the ink off the paper with the tip of my nib and wiped it away so that more of the leg definition came back. I also went through and added more highlights with thicker white. Alright, let's give you guys a little bit of a closer look, and a look that will show off the shimmer a bit more. Yes, shimmer and shine. It makes me so happy. I was pretty happy with how this looked. But upon talking with my mom and sisters, they told me that this greenery for my blackberry looked a lot different than the greenery for my roses, and after figuring out what they meant, they just wanted it to be more yellow, because my other greenery was a bit more yellow. So I added a light coat of yellow, and then they were a lot happier. And I also added a little bit of yellow to that rose, just because, you know, last minute touch-ups. And here's a nice up-close look at how everything turned out. Again, I really like botanical scrolls. I think they are a lot of fun. I would definitely recommend anyone who's struggling to figure out what they want to do next, and if you like making natural works, definitely try this out. It's a lot of fun to take these old pictures of flowers and greenery and little critters and repaint them for yourself. You can also add your own artistic flair. It's a lot of fun. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.